And welcome on in, everybody, to the Check Your Brain podcast, wherever you are listening to this for free on the podcast platforms out there, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, but also I'm on YouTube, Rumble, and I am on Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. And that is my name, Tony Mazur, nice Polish name. And yes, I am here. Yeah, I talk to a lot of different people on the podcast, a lot of comedians, a lot of writers, whether they could be in sports, politics. We talk about culture and everything. But there are a few people that I've had on the podcast that I have the opportunity to talk to that have had such a career that's been very versatile, that has had to pivot several times in their career and always seem to come out on top. And it doesn't always work out for everybody. But this guy, I think his career path is so fascinating, and I enjoy it so much for being somebody that has been a name and decided, you know what, let's do this. And it's been a success almost every time he's done something. And that is my guest today, and his name is Eddie Deezen. Eddie, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate this. This is great.
It's my pleasure, Tony. I want to open by saying how cool your shirt is.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
I'm colorblind, but I can see it's cool blue, bright blue.
It is blue. It is a White Castle shirt. We don't have White Castle, unfortunately, in Cleveland anymore. But I pine for the days of when I needed a couple of sliders at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I would get them in LA. They had them. We didn't get it fresh from the White Castle's in New Jersey.
They're kind of all around like the Midwest.
Yeah, so I got them on the East Coast. Yeah, I got them on the East Coast. We didn't have them in LA, but then they started sending them frozen. So I'd get them at the market, and I'd thaw them in the microwave. I love them.
There's some places that when you move out into a different area that you just got to have. And there's a great story about Drew Carey, that there's a place called, I believe it's Antonio's Pizza. It's in Parma, Ohio, which is just up the street from me. And Drew Carey's from Parma, that he had pizzas and like wings maybe and pasta in dry frozen and sent all the way out to Los Angeles when he was out there just for it. So sometimes like when you're from an area and you move out to LA, you move to New York and you don't get that anymore. It's great. And you're somebody who's from, you're from Maryland. So I'm sure there's been something in that area with it by the time you got to LA, you're like, yes. Man, I'd love to have
saying that story. Perfect coincidence. And let me let me tell you this story, and let me open with another incredible story from yesterday. But this one just happened today, I swear, because I was in LA and I'm a See's chocolate freak. I love milk chocolate candies. I get See's chocolates. I go all the time. They sell them at the Glendale Galleria. And I would get all 1 pound box, 1/3 milk chocolate buttercream, 1 pound, 1/3 milk vanilla buttercream, 1 pound milk coconut. And they don't have it out here. So I ordered Denise, the lovely lady I'm living with Stevie. They're the couple taking care of me. And she ordered me some See's chocolates, and I just got them today. So I'm in heaven.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Isn't that great just getting that from your hometown? And
yes,
there's some places you would love to have. And
yes, and you know what I'm dying for? And Stevie too, my favorite place in LA, I miss the most, Pink's hot dogs. I wonder if they can ship them out here, because I'm a Pink's hot dog. I would eat 4 at a time.
Well, that's great. Well, one of these times I'll be back in LA, and maybe I'll send you some if you're still on this coast. Let's get the plugs out of the way. I always like to do these sandwich plugs. And you're somebody who's very active on Cameo. And so if you go to cameo.com/Eddie Deezen, Deezen, and if you want a personalized message from Eddie, from Eugene from Greece, or whatever you've seen him in, and we'll talk about that here on this podcast. But if you are interested in getting a Cameo, go to cameo.com/Eddie Deezen. You basically, for anyone who hasn't done Cameo, you just give them a prompt. You say what couple of things you might want, and and you just go from there.
Yeah, they're fun. We've done them not only in America, but we've got orders from Spain, from Mexico, from Canada, Australia. They're just people all around. They're fun. They're great stocking stuff. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, holidays, birthdays. Of course, we get happy bar mitzvah. We just got married. Happy anniversary. Anything, I'll say. And they're wonderful. They bring people joy, and I love doing them. So if you want to order them, please order them. I'll be honest, they're $30, and they're a nice gift. You can have them the rest of your life.
Oh yeah, I've done it before for my so 3 years ago, my wife and I got married, and my wife is a big Green Bay Packers fan. So I thought, let's see, this is COVID times. We can't really go on many trips right now. So why not I go on Cameo and I get a Brett Favre?
Oh my God. How much is he?
Let's see. What's the answer I want to tell you, and what's the answer I would tell her?
I would guess he's $200.
North. Yes, we're looking at about $300.
$300, yeah, because he was great, and he's also in Something About Mary, so he was great in that. I love Brett Favre.
That's true. I mean, but $300 for Brett Favre to go,
Yeah,
hey,
you must love your wife very much.
happy wedding. I hope that everything goes great. Or you can pay $30 for Eddie Deezen. You get a way more personalized message, somebody you could actually get a chance to talk to. So go to cameo.com/Eddie Deezen. And so Eddie, I just, I can talk about so many different things. I've talked to our good pal, Steve, who hooked this interview up, and I thank him for it. There's so many different ways I can start this podcast off, but I'll start it off in a personal way, is that I have a personal connection to Grease because when I was in high school, I was Danny Zuko in my class play. And it was funny because I've been so fascinated by the career of John Travolta, who's, you've said in the past, has been very nice to you. But it's always funny when I do the John Travolta impression, it's always Vinnie Barbarino.
Oh, let me hear.
Well, when I was doing it, I'm like, hey, Kaniki, what's with this hunk of junk? Hey,
that's good. That's a great John Travolta. That's a great one.
Stranded at the drive-in. Hey,
that's about the. I'm not trying to flatter. That's about the best John Travolta I've ever heard. That's excellent. Have you ever met him?
I have not. No, I would have loved to.
You get a kick out of that. Do you do any others?
I could do plenty others if I think about it, but it was just funny how I'm on stage as a 17-year-old in high school. And I'm doing Grease, and I'm Danny Zuko. I'm the lead in the play. And we have a tape somewhere. And my wife has told me, she's like, where is this tape and when can we see it? And I'm like, I don't have access to it. So we're on this Amber Alert to try to find this tape of 2005 Cuyahoga Heights High School Grease.
Danny, did you do that all through the play? Did you do Travolta all through the play like that?
Except for the singing. I couldn't replicate the singing.
I'll bet the audience loved it.
They enjoyed it, especially in the scene when I'm trying out for the for the track team, and I've got these really high shorts on, very high revealing shorts.
How did you do that scene on stage?
I did it. I had a cigarette, and I'm like, I don't remember, honestly. It's been 20 years, so I don't really remember the dialogue.
John trips over the thing, the high jump thing. You couldn't do that on stage.
Oh, yeah, no, I wasn't able to do much of that. It was just kind of, because I had to go from, I'm blanking, it may have been one of the dance scenes, and then we cut ahead to, I had to basically strip off and then put tube socks on and put the wife beater and everything on for the track scene, because I'm trying to impress Sandy. But of course, talking to somebody who has been in Grease, and it was Eugene. You've talked about it many times, and it's going on it's actually 45 years this year since Grease came up.
2 days, Tony.
In 2 days, really?
45th anniversary, yes.
So let's lead up to that scene here, or let's lead up to the movie, because you're somebody, again, you're from Cumberland, Maryland. Right. And you graduated high school, and basically immediately you got on the next plane, head to Los Angeles. How did those work from graduating high school to, hey, in a couple of years, I'm going to be in one of the biggest movies of the decade?
It's a miracle. And I don't know, I've told this story hundreds of times or dozens of times. I don't know if you're a religious person. If you're a religious person, you can take it that way. If you're an atheist, if you're a secularist, you take it that way. It's a lucky break. But this is the true story. I got an audition for Grease. I had an agent named Regina Penner. She was a terrible agent, but she got me that audition. It was like a big cattle call. I went into the audition room. Well, first of all, I had an ice cream suit. I was previous to Pee Wee Herman. I had a Pee Wee Herman suit. I bought that, a little bow tie, and which doesn't work for Eugene, but I've got some Vitalis. So I made my hair all greasy. I take it. The movie's named Grease, so I'll grease up my hair. But I didn't realize Eugene doesn't have grease. He's a nerd. The T-Birds have grease. Danny Zuko and Nikki have grease. But I greased up my hair. I remember going in. So I go in. The room surrounded all these guys in leather jackets, T-shirts like Henry Winkler, Fonzie. It was a bunch of Fonzies. Paul LaMatta, American Graffiti. They were all these tough guys, and there all these pretty girls with ponytails and poodle skirts, with saddle shoes. I was the only geek there. It was half the beautiful girls, half the macho, handsome guys, and me. I think I was the only nerd there. So anyway, I'm called in. It was Joel Thurman, the casting director, Randall Kleiser, our director, and Alan Carr, our producer. So I auditioned. Eugene, I had like 3 lines, and I noticed I was auditioning. They were nudging each other. Again, they go, do it again, read it again. And they were nudging each other. So I thought that was a good sign. Anyway, I did the audition. I went home. A day or two later, my agent calls, oh, they like you. You're in Grease. You're going to play Eugene. So I'm over the moon. I called my mom and dad, my brother and sister, my friends. I'm in this movie with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. It's called Grease, blah, 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 blah. I'm crazy. Anyway, a couple of days later, Paramount calls my agent. They say, Eugene's a small role. We're going to cut him out of the movie. It's not going to be necessary. So we don't need Eddie anymore. So, I'm about to take a gun. Are you serious?
Yeah.
They pulled the rug out from under me. So anyway, my agent's on the phone. She told me the bad news. I'm about to cry, but she goes, look, we're going to go to church and pray. I go, I'm Jewish. I never been. She goes, come on. She comes down. She gets me to church. The church is still there. It's called Our Mother of Good Counsel. It's on Vermont Avenue in Los Angeles. If you want to visit it. It's on Vermont off Hollywood Boulevard. Our Mother of Good Counsel. It's a great church. But anyway, we went in there. She goes, we're going to go in and light a candle. What? She goes, you light a candle. This is Goyim to me. I don't know. So we go in, my agent and I light a candle, and she goes, say a prayer. And we both said a prayer. And I prayed, good things would happen. Something good would happen. Anyway, about 3 days later, Tony, I swear to God, she called me. She goes, guess what? Paramount called. They want you back in Greece. So that's a true story. So again, religious people go, oh, there's an angel watching over you. It's religious. Secular people say it's a coincidence. You're the luckiest guy in the world. You got a lucky break. So you can view it however you want. The answer is metaphysical or whatever, but that story happened. That's how I got in Greece.
Well, I mean, it's so fascinating because you were somebody that, like I said, that you flew out to California because you wanted to be a comedian. And
Yes.
you were at the Comedy Store during the beginning of what ended up being the comedy boom of the 80s.
Exactly.
But you were there at the beginning. So Sammy Shore takes over and buys Comedy Store. And Mitzi, they used to be the old Ciro's back in the 40s.
Yeah, so yeah, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were there. Exactly right. It was historic, and you're exactly right. The big comics at the time, there were three. At that time, it was Gabe Kaplan, Welcome Back, Kotter, Jimmy Walker, Good Times, and who was the third? There were three big comics. Oh, Freddie Prinze, tragically. Freddie Prinze, hadn't passed away yet. So those were the three big comics. Yeah, Freddie Prinze sadly died before I got Grease, but he died early 77. I got Grease a few months later. But when I came to Hollywood, those were the big three.
Ciro's. What I was going to say about Ciro's, it's interesting because I know you love old Hollywood. There was 1941, and no pun intended because you were in that movie as well.
Yes.
But 1941, there was a Looney Tunes cartoon. I think you know about this. It's called Hollywood Steps Out.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. The Marx Brothers, I love that.
They show all of them. Everybody who was big at that time. Yeah,
that's a Tex Avery, isn't it? Is that Tex Avery?
I believe it is Tex Avery.
Tex Avery was, my favorite cartoonist, genius. And yeah, that's a great one with Groucho and Harpo. Now, you notice the Groucho voice doesn't sound anything like Groucho. I always wonder, why didn't they get a better guy to imitate Groucho? The guy doesn't sound like Groucho at all. But it's a great with Clark Gable dancing. I remember that one.
I forgot who there was I'm blanking as somebody's probably yelling at me when they're listening to this, but there was a young voice actor who did many of those voices who died in a plane crash not long after, who was going to be the next Mel Blanc.
Why didn't they just use Mel Blanc? I always wonder, why didn't they use him?
They did. I think they used him. I'm going to look it up as I do this, but it was for Hollywood Steps Out, and it was fascinating because it was a young, like 20-year-old actor, and it was during obviously 1941 and World War II, and it was a training mission down in, I believe, Pensacola, Florida, that he ended up dying. But he was very young, and he was going to be the next of the great voice actors.
Oh, let me know who that's. I'd like to read about him on Google. I'd like to Google that. I never heard that story, Tony. That's so sad.
And if it wasn't for him, I mean, you think of June Foray, you think of Mel Blanc and everything. It was fascinating. But Ciro's became the Comedy Store. And by the 1970s, you had 1972 when Johnny Carson moved to Burbank. And then he was bringing up, like you said, Freddie Prinze, Steve Landesberg, Jimmy Walker. Jimmy Walker, one of the few people to do both the Comedy Store and the Improv down the street.
Okay.
And you were wanting to be a part of that. Now, what got you wanting to do comedy, and what made you kind of humble yourself and say, maybe this isn't for me?
Yeah, I wanted to be a comedian. From a great philosopher said, we've developed our basic purpose in life from the age of 2. We've all established it. And from the age of the earliest ages, I was always doing crazy, funny things, and I always wanted to make people laugh. My earliest days, I was always getting in trouble in school. Even in kindergarten, they'd separate me from the other kids in kindergarten. Eddie, go sit on the steps. I was like 4 years old. I'd cause trouble, sit on the steps. School, the first grade. I was so crazy, and I was wound up, hyperactive. In first grade, my first grade teacher would tie me in my chair with a jump rope. Miss Smith, she tied me in my chair with a jump rope. I used to get detention all the time, staying after school. I was suspended a couple times, and I was always to get laughs. But I wanted to do that. And the first way I went out, I was this is how naive I was, Tony. I came out to Hollywood, and I started calling the studios. I look up the Paramount Studios, and I call, hi, do you need a good comedian? And I called Universal. And it's amazing. None of these women hung up on me. The secretaries were always gracious. I remember one was really empathetic. She goes, honey, you have to get an agent and blah, blah, blah. But I was that naive. But they could call them and they call me and, oh, we're going to put you in a movie. You want to be in a movie? Sure. I thought it was that easy. That's how green, I was as green as a lime, So that's how I started. And then the first avenue was stand-up comedy. I obviously couldn't get in the movies. The Gong Show I did later that year. That's my TV debut. I'll talk to you about that later. But I came to LA in June of 75. My Comedy Store debut was January of 76. So it was only a few months. I did a routine. I had it on index cards. I wrote down, even in those days, I had a hard time remembering lines. So I read my whole thing, go, here he is, Eddie Deezen, Plaza, Plaza, Plaza. Sure, but will you respect me in the morning? That was my opening joke, Tony. So that was the laughs. And then it was, I tell all my jokes and I did good. The first 2 times in LA, I got good applause. And Mitzi said, oh, you're very funny. Why don't you go to the Comedy Store in Westwood? We're going to move you. So I went to Westwood. I flopped. I totally bombed. And I just stopped doing it. I go, you know what? I don't like doing this. So it was hard on me. I wasn't comfortable. I knew movies in my heart and soul. I knew I wanted to get into movies. And then I pulled in Grease a little over a year later with that story.
I mean, it's fascinating because like I do stand-up comedy as well. And
okay. Do you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it years ago. Mm-hmm. I don't enjoy it as much with me doing podcasting and everything. And that was the one thing about getting on stage, hearing your voice. And you want to hear your voice and you want to establish your voice. Mm-hmm. Well, if you do podcasting, and I did 15 years of radio as well, I hear my voice every day, 4 to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'm tired of my voice. It was one of those cases where,
right.
But when you say a voice, you start to hear it. But what is your voice comedically? And does your comedic voice, when you go on stage, does that represent who you are? Or are you doing a caricature of yourself? Or are you doing somebody that is nowhere close to yourself? Like Andrew Dice Clay was a perfect example of that, where Andrew Silverman was not Andrew Dice Clay. That was Andrew Dice Clay, the character that we saw on stage and that you saw probably firsthand at the Comedy Store was Buddy Love, which was Jerry Lewis in Nutty Professor, the original.
Right. I remember that. He does a great one.
And that's what that character became, because he did the Jerry Lewis, the nerdy one. He did the Jerry Lewis in, and I know you're a big Jerry Lewis fan as well.
Oh, yeah.
He did Jerry Lewis and the Errand Boy and Jerry Lewis and Cinderfella and everything. So that was one of his characters.
Nutty Professor. That's the only thing I saw Andrew do there. I've never met Andrew, but he's a fascinating guy, very talented.
And he did a lot of those. And like in those days, in the late 70s, early 80s, you wanted to break into comedy. You did a lot of sitcoms, but you had kind of tapped yourself out when it came to comedy, and you got into doing some TV, but eventually movies. And I wanted to ask you about 1941, for example. And if you're watching on the video, I have to put this up there for you. You and Murray Hamilton. How great is this? You and Murray Hamilton.
Murray, did you ask about? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, it's such a great photo. If you're watching on the YouTube right now, you and Murray Hamilton in 1941. And let's talk about 1941, because it's a movie that, looking back, is it a classic? Is it one where people are going to look back at Steven Spielberg's full work and say that movie stands out? Maybe not, but there's a lot of interesting moments and great cameos and a great cast to that movie as well.
Absolutely.
That keeps it going.
Absolutely. So many stories about 1941. Steven was a wonderful director, super nice guy. John Belushi, I loved. The nice guy. Dan Aykroyd, I loved. John Candy, I loved. I loved everybody in the cast. And by the way, to interject this, you can cut this out, or I just want to put on your show. I want to send my love to Treat Williams, who was a super nice guy.
Yes.
God bless him. And my love goes to his family and kids. I didn't know him real well. I only talked to him one time. We interchanged only once, but he was always a nice guy in the set, and he was very talented. It was a horrible tragedy. But anyway, getting back to 1941, my best 1941 story, okay, I'll tell you, Tony. I was on the Ferris wheel, and I spent the whole film pretty much on the Ferris wheel. It was me, Murray, and my dummy. So I don't know if have you seen 1941?
It's been years, but yes.
Okay, one of the big climactic scenes is they shoot down our Ferris wheel and we roll off it into the pier. So to do that, of course, it's fake with miniatures. They use a miniature Ferris wheel, but they also had to shoot me and Murray going around, and Steven was whipping us around real fast. Now I get bad motion sickness. So I started to feel nauseous. I go, Steven, can you please stop? So he stopped the Ferris wheel. He was whipping us around for, 4 or 5 minutes. And I was really nauseous. I come down, they pull me out. I go, Steven, I feel really nauseous, please. He goes, look, lay down in my dressing room. So we had his beautiful secretary. I remember this day. She was so beautiful. She took me by the arm and she took me down, laid me down in Stephen's cot in his dressing room. She closed the door. So I'm laying down in bed, dying. Then I start to feel really nauseous. I knew I had to throw up. So I crawl on my hands and knees into Spielberg's bathroom. I threw up, Tony. Blah, I threw up in Stephen's toilet. And I realized the significance. I just threw up in Steven Spielberg's toilet. One of the highlights of my life, highlights of my career. That was my biggest moment.
Steven Spielberg's toilet had Eddie Deezen puke in it. I mean,
Yeah.
look, I know we want to sell things on eBay nowadays and autograph pictures and stuff like that, but can we find that toilet?
Yeah, I'll tell you, you want to hear trivia? I'm the only actor in Hollywood history. I threw up in 3 of my first 4 movies. I threw up in Greece. My last day in Greece, okay, we're doing the carnival scene. That's my big scene. I get hit in the face with a pie. That's my big scene in Greece. But later on, my last bit was the director came up to me and Alan Carr, the producer, came up to me, the director, Randall Clyde, said, Eddie, will you get on the twirling machine, whatever it's called in the carnival? It's a machine where you stand up, they strap you in and they spin you around. So they go, Eddie, will you do a shot of that? We'll just get an establishing shot there. I go, please don't. I get bad motion sickness. I didn't want to, but it's my first film. I couldn't talk back. So I conceded to do it. They strapped me in the machine. They whipped me around, just like that. I got off the machine. I'm woozy. Tony, I wobbled out to the middle of a pasture. There was like a big pasture. There was nobody there. And I heaved up in the middle of the pasture. This is August 2nd, 1977. That was my last day on Greece. I threw up. Anyway, my last day, we can get to this too. I did a movie called I Want to Hold Your Hand, which was my 3rd film. Yep. This is the first film Steven Spielberg ever produced and was the first film ever directed by Bob Zemeckis, who later did The Polar Express. But anyway, the last day when we wrapped, Bob gave me a cigar as a gift, a parting gift, good luck. And I didn't know cigars. I never smoked one. I didn't know about cigars. You're not supposed to inhale.
Oh, yeah.
So I was real full. I go home and started puffing it. I inhaled the whole thing down. Again, I feel nauseous and woozy. I went to my toilet and threw up. So I threw up 3 of my first 4 films. That ought to gross your fans out, Tony.
I would say that, but there's a lot of people probably nervous. They're probably like, wait, only 3 films you threw up?
No, it's with my critics that throw up.
I have to ask you about something. I was looking at your credits, and I have to bring something up that I thought was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. Was a movie that you were in, or partially in, and that apparently you got cut out or whatever, called A Polish Vampire in Burbank.
That's the low point, the nadir of my career. I think it's the worst thing I did. And now I don't hardly remember. I think I saw it once. I did it as a favor for a friend. His name was Scott something, was the director. He was a nice guy. And I did it as a favor. It might even have been non-union. I was taking risks because if you go non-union with SAG, you're in trouble. But I did it as a favor. And then he wouldn't give me a ride home. So we got into a big fight and I walked off the movie because I wasn't under contract, but it was a low budget thing. And he made it slip me a couple $100. I don't know. This is back in like 1985 or something. Yeah, that's about it. I don't hardly remember it. I don't hardly remember it.
I looked it up and it said that you played a character named Sphincter.
Sphincter, okay, gotcha.
And when you were out of the movie, like you pulled out or whatever, and then they replaced.
I wasn't under contract, and he wouldn't give me a ride home. So, and then he was, oh wait, you ride home, don't worry. And I go, no, you didn't give me a ride home. I did you all these favors, and we got into a fight. Now we're friends now. I've seen him at signing shows. His name is Scott. He's a nice guy, but I got mad at him there because he didn't give me a ride home.
But I guess you had gotten cut out of the movie, and what they did is they kept your parts in the movie, but used it as a flashback.
Yeah,
I've never heard of this.
They did a Plan 9 from outer space. They remember when Shemp died? They got a fake Shemp. So I did I think that one day, and I think they filled me in. I don't know how they did it, but they mixed me in somehow. I don't know. I actually wouldn't mind seeing it again.
Yeah, why not? I mean, you could probably watch it if they haven't played it on Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah. Like Stevie and I watch all my old movies here. He can get them all on cable. And I haven't cringed at any of them. I saw Muggsy's Girls. We saw Laser Blast. The Mystery Science Theater Laser Blast is hilarious. And we've seen some of my old stuff, and it's fun. I watched I Want to Hold Your Hand. And it's fun to do it, relive them. Yeah. We were just talking today. I did one called Desperate Moves. There was a big skating fad in the early 80s. And I did it, and I met my ex-wife there on that film. It's called Desperate Moves. And I did that movie there. Stevie's trying to get it so we can watch that one.
There was a weird, that skating phase that was going on.
Remember that?
It was happening. Yeah. It was a little before. I was born in 88. So it was a little before my time. But I just remember a lot of those, and they kind of went back into the ash bin. But you were a part of that, and it's a weird culture that is kind of coming back a little bit. I've noticed that teen sex culture, teen
Oh yeah,
sex movies,
yeah.
and they're kind of recreating them, albeit heavily sanitized. It's not the days of Porky's anymore, even American
Mhm.
Pie. But there's something in our culture that they're like, let's just go back to the well. Let's watch those old movies. Those are
Mhm.
great.
Yeah, yeah, it's nostalgic. A lot of people are unhappy with the world. So many, just go to Facebook. There's a lot of unhappy people. So yeah, maybe so. Trying to grab nostalgia. I think that's one of the things about Grease. Definitely, Grease is a feel-good movie. Why do people like Grease so much? It makes you feel good. Stevie and I watched it maybe like a couple months ago, 6 weeks ago, and I was a little down. And I watched it and I felt so happy and bright. It just you can't help but be cheered up by that music. It was like a love fest. We all loved each other. Yeah.
Now, was that a happy set? Because I've heard
Yes.
some movies that are
Yes.
like a big production and people love
Mhm.
them, and then when you talk to some actors on the set, they're like, "Yeah, it may have seemed like it, but remember, it is acting after all."
Yeah.
But you seem to really enjoy yourself on it.
Yes, absolutely. The happiest set ever. I've never really been on a non-happy set. I never remember. I've seen some people quarrel on sets. They didn't get along, other actors and such and such. And I didn't get along with one director. That's all. I don't know if you want to get into that, but it's always been happy set. But Grease was extraordinarily happy. I always get asked, Tony, they go, what was Grease like? That's the question I get most asked. And I go, remember the greatest part of your life, the best party ever, where everybody just had a blast and everybody's getting along and you just didn't want it to ever end. And I go, imagine that party lasting for 2 months. And I go, that's what Grease was like. That's what it felt like. Every day you were going to set, it was like you're going to a great party.
Boy, is that, I mean, you'll watch that nowadays. And again, with me being in it, and I had seen it and had the soundtrack and everything, and even heard things, by the way, in the soundtrack that aren't in the movie, but they're actually in the plays that I
Mhm.
had to sing along to. And I'm like, I have no recollection of this because it's not in the movie. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things where back in the 70s, well, like we love nostalgia as our culture. And in the 70s, we love the 50s and into the
Right.
80s. And then like nowadays, everything is all 80s and 90s stuff. Like we're
Mhm.
like, oh, wasn't the 90s great? And I'm like, well, I remember the 90s, and I remember in the 90s, we pined for the 70s. It's
Mhm.
just
Yes,
everything's like
absolutely.
a 20-year cycle now.
Yeah, and when I came out early in the 70s, you're right, we were pining for the 50s. It was all Fonzie. That was a big deal. And
American
then, of course,
Graffiti,
Elvis
yeah.
died. The last day of Greece, was August 16th, 1977. That's the scene with the pillow party, the pillow sleepover, stalkers there. And she sings of the Elvis poster. Elvis,
Yes.
get your filthy paws off me. That day was the last day of filming on Greece. That was the last scene they shot. And that was the day Elvis Presley died. It was the weirdest
Really?
coincidence. Yeah, it's a Ripley's Believe It or Not, but it's a true story. Elvis died, and in LA, I finished the film on the second, but I remember in LA there was like a huge downpour rain. It doesn't rain that much in LA, but the day Elvis died, there was a downpour. It was like a flood of rain. It was almost like he caused it or God did it.
It was August 1977, and that's when and I know you know this because you're a Marx Brothers fan, because Groucho
Yeah.
passed away 3 days later.
Yes, exactly. And he got overshadowed. And I've talked to so many Marx Brothers fans who are still pissed off about that. They go, Groucho's, the greatest comedian that ever lived. But, Elvis was like beyond anybody. Elvis is bigger than the president. Elvis is like God level. And it was all Elvis, Elvis, Elvis. So Groucho is a little overlooked. It's sad that happened that way. But Groucho's an immortal too.
They always said that Groucho is the only time he ever had bad timing.
Oh, very good. Yeah, very good. True.
Steve Stoliar, I've had him on my podcast,
Yeah, isn't
and
he great? Super nice guy.
excellent. And
Yeah.
and for folks who don't know, Steve Stoliar worked with Groucho as his assistant for about 3 years with the infamous and notorious Aaron Fleming,
Yes.
and worked from 77 or 74 to 77. And it was one of those when Groucho ended up dying back in 77 with a couple of days after Elvis. I think it was like Dick Cavett and Woody Allen wrote to the newspapers by saying, there are other kings who died this week as well.
Oh, that's very touching. Yeah, it's too bad. I'll tell you my Steve Stoliar, how we're weirdly connected. This is 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but I'll tell you a story that shaped my life. This is a story that changed my life. My life was changed, Tony, over $1. But anyway, we went to I knew I wanted to be a comedian. I graduated from high school in 75. So I knew I was getting my career ready. I go, I'm in Maryland. I'm going to go to New York and establish my career. So the family went on vacation in New York the summer of 74. I'm gonna graduate. My graduation, my last senior year was the next year. So I go to New York. It was exhilarating, the magic in New York, the great restaurants, the sights, it's just New York, you come alive. You can't help but be caught up in it. And I was having a ball, great time. I went to see Animal Crackers. Steve Stoliar got it re-released, and I went to see it 4 days in a row. I went to the Rialto Theater 4 days in a row and saw it. I was in heaven. So anyway, I was the happiest guy. I go, I'm going to come to New York. I'm going to be a comedian, da, 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 da. So anyway, I'm walking down the street. I go, I'm always with my family. So I feel in my oats. I say to mom, dad, I go, I'm going to go out for a walk. So I went out for a walk in the night alone. I was like 17. I probably weighed like about 111 pounds. I was a skinny galoot. So I'm walking down the street. This guy stops me on the street. He goes, hey, can you give me $1 for change? I go, all right. I don't know any better. There were no hustlers. Where I grew up in Cumberland, Maryland, I didn't know what a hustler was. So I give him $1 and I give the guy $1 bill. So the guy stands there. I go, where's my change? He goes, what do you mean? You didn't give me no $1. I go, yes, I did. I gave you $1, mister. Where's my change? He goes, you didn't give me no $1. Finally, it dawns on me, I'm being hustled. This guy's a con artist. He's a criminal. I started to feel a little woozy. My knees are starting to buckle, this guy's a big, a tough guy like Mike Mazurki, obviously I can't fight him. So I knew the guy's got my $1. It's only $1, but I'd never been conned or cheated like that in my life. I trusted humanity. He broke my trust in humanity. Anyway, to that day, Tony, I came back and I resolved, I go, New York sucks. It's a crap hole. I go, I am never coming back to New York to start my career. And that changed my life. If that guy hadn't taken that $1, I would have gone to New York. I would have never got Grease. I would probably have never made a movie. I probably would have been a fair. I would have probably come on back home. I would have run a Dairy Queen in Cumberland, Maryland. So that guy, that schmuck, changed my life for that $1. He might still be alive. I don't know. I never found out who he is. I don't know if he ever found out who I was.
And you come to find out it was Bud Abbott.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Who gave me the $1? Who's on first?
Well, that was one of those. Getting. I wanted to ask you about Marx Brothers because you said Animal Crackers, and
yes.
What I found interesting about Animal Crackers and the Marx Brothers in general, by the time you got to the baby boomer generation, is it was not. Obviously some of the movies like Go West and At the Circus and Night in Casablanca, they're like, they're not great movies.
No.
And I think if you ask,
like they say, as Marx Brothers fans say, any Marx Brothers is better than anybody else. It's like the Beatles. The Beatles had some dog songs, but any Beatles song's better than any other group's best stuff. And the same with Marx Brothers. Just to see the Marx Brothers is a thrill, but I totally understand what you're saying. Room Service is really bad. Some of those are really Love Happy, I love Harpo, but it's not that great of a movie. But you're seeing the Marx Brothers,
Well, I mean, I'm a Zeppo guy. I love the fact, even though Zeppo doesn't bring a ton, it's the fact that I would rather have the 4 Marx Brothers there than the 3, and then like some ensemble to try to keep a movie together.
Zeppo gave this balance to them because Groucho and Chico, Harpo and Chico always paired off, they were always like brothers. And in real life, they liked to gamble and screw around. And Groucho was always alone, the studious when reading books. And Zeppo gave it balance. He gave Groucho a guy to be, so it usually paired off. It was always Chico and Harpo, Groucho and Zeppo. And he gave the team a balance. It's kind of like the Three Stooges. Larry is obviously the lesser. Moe was the leader. He was important. He's the boss. Curly is the genius. But Larry kind of gave him a balance. If it was Moe and Curly, it probably wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah. I agree with that. I could talk about Stooges here just like for the rest of the podcast if I need to.
Yeah,
like
same here.
Marx Brothers, I think you're in agreement where we look at Night at the Opera and Day at the Races as, I think if you're kind of a casual Marx Brothers fan, you think those are the pinnacle of the Marx Brothers, when I think you and I believe that's about the beginning of the end.
Yeah. Absolutely. The 5 at Paramount are the best, no question. Night at the Opera is a beautiful, great film. Now it started going on where Day at the Races was a great comedy. They were all great. First of all, I'll tell you a weird observation, but let me get this. Day at the Races I like. It's an enjoyable film, but there's that water ballet in it. They do that water ballet, and it seems to go on.
The Busby Berkeley thing, yeah.
Yeah, and it goes on forever. It broke up the comedy momentum. They're having this great film, and it just broke up the momentum, and I couldn't stand that part. It's like, I don't know if you're a Beatles fan, but Help. My favorite all-time movie is A Hard Day's Night. And then they did Help the next year, which starts out great. It's funny. And then there's this tedious part in the middle. For whatever reason, I'm like bored with the Beatles. It's like half hour and nothing really happens. I don't know. There was this tedious bit in the middle. Whereas Hard Day's Night, it's funny all the way through. It works all the way through.
Yeah, it was I think Duck Soup is probably still my favorite.
Yeah, Duck Soup was Harpo's favorite.
Yeah, a lot of people consider some of those Paramount movies, and even like the one thing about Coconuts and Animal Crackers is those are stage plays. and they are acted as stage plays. Like, I mean, it is one shot, there's one camera there, and but if you take it for what it is, yes, I mean they're great movies and everything. It's just I think those are like when you get to Duck Soup, I think that is an absolute, and that's why I think a lot of baby boomers resonated with the anarchy and the anti-establishment that Groucho was saying in a lot of those movies by the time you get to the 60s and the 70s. And that's why Groucho experienced this massive upheaval and like uptick in popularity by the time.
On college campuses went crazy over him. He was like, yeah, the anti-establishment. And you know what's funny about Duck Soup? That's the one movie that there's no harp solo and no piano number. And I always enjoyed Chico's piano numbers. The harp numbers I'm not crazy about, but I love Harpo. Just to see Harpo is a thrill. But that's the one they cut the music out. I like my favorite, Tony, is I like Horse Feathers myself. I'm a Horse Feathers nut. To me, that
Horse Feathers is
my
great.
Favorite Chico. Yeah, that's my favorite Groucho number. I always get my man, and my favorite Chico piano number with Thelma Todd. Watch that closely, by the way. You can see that, Tony, on YouTube, the piano number with Chico and Thelma Todd, and watch Thelma's hands closely. She grabs them. You can see she slips her hand under and gives Chico a little pinch.
Oh yeah, no, it's it's funny because I told you off the air that I have a cat named Eddie, but unfortunately not named Eddie Deezen. I do have another cat. Eddie? What's that?
Why did you name him Eddie?
My wife is a big Ohio State fan, and there's a running back who played for them named Eddie George, and so we kind of kept it going. Although I do have another cat named Harpo, and yes, it is named after Harpo Marx.
Very cool. I thought you were going to say one of my other heroes, Eddie Haskell. I thought you were going to say Eddie Haskell.
No, not Eddie Haskell. I could go down the whole list, but
the only Leave It to Beaver episodes I watch. I don't like the series, but anytime Eddie Haskell on, I love it. It's the only episodes I like are the Eddie Haskell episodes.
How was speaking of Eddie Haskell, I was watching I love SCTV. I always mention it all the time. And there's a classic episode of SCTV. It came out in maybe 76, 77, where they did a Leave It to Beaver 25th anniversary where Ward, played by Joe Flaherty, is a drunk, and June Cleaver is hooking up with Mr. Rutherford down the street and going to Tijuana, and Beaver's been on welfare, and and Wally's been on it is on
YouTube? I'd love to see it.
So Beaver is played by John Candy. So that's my segue. And you mentioned John Candy. What was it like to work around somebody like John Candy, who was like, no pun intended, a larger than life figure?
I want to answer your question. Just to answer one question quick. Is Eddie Haskell in the sketch?
Yes, Eddie Haskell is played by Dave Thomas.
Okay, I want to see that. Thank you.
And Dave Thomas is Eddie Haskell, who is hitting on Wally because Eddie Haskell's actually gay, and he's hitting on Wally, who's played by Eugene Levy.
That's funny. John Candy was the sweetest guy in the world. I loved him. He was so nice. I didn't know who he was. I'd never seen SCTV at that time. I love John. He just couldn't have been nicer. I remember my big moment with him was once I was walking down Hollywood Boulevard, and he and his agent or his manager were there, and we run into each other. And we went into a Howard Johnson together, and we had ice cream together. And it was just a beautiful moment. And I remember his manager, his agent, was a little rude. He was laughing at my voice. I go, da-da-da, hi, da-da-da. And he talks that way, and he's laughing. And John goes, that's rude. Don't do that. He was just a mensch, real gentleman. I loved him. And I remember after I did Polar Express, okay, we can talk about that. But I did Polar Express after I finished my last day. Tom Hanks goes, I hear you're a baseball fan, Eddie. And I go, yeah. He goes, do you want to come to a Dodger game with me? No, you're kidding, right? So he took me to 3 Dodger games. Anyway, I can get into that later. But I remember Tom.
No, that's a great story. I love this story.
Okay. But anyway, one of the conversations I had, Tom Hanks was talking about John Candy. And I looked at him and he was almost crying. He literally had tears welling up in his eyes. He said, this was a very special man, blah, blah, blah. And I thought he was going to cry, but he just loved John Candy. He knew him a lot better than me, but he was just a great guy. He's one of these guys everybody loved, just total joy. Yeah.
That's it's amazing. I mean, there's some people that, you hear about Hollywood people, and you hear about, for those of us who are not in like any type of business, and I'm at the lowest of the lowest form of the business of podcasting, comedy, radio, whatever.
You're interviewing me, so you can't get any lower than that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when you're one of my bigger guests, that's so. But being around these people, and you hear about these stories, and you want to know that these people are great people, and it's so great to hear. And
I have a few jerk stories, a very few. I've always said, Tony, I go probably 9. I've met so many of the gigantic stars, celebrities, writers. I'd say 97% are the nicest people you could ever imagine.
I was going to say that
three
about
or four dicks, there are a few dicks here and there, but
Jerry
very
Lewis.
far between. Jerry Lewis was a dick. Yeah.
Talk about that story.
Fair. Okay, I want to be fair. I have a lot of Jerry Lewis stories, but Jerry Lewis knew of me evidently. And now I'll tell you, this is the cool story. A guy on Facebook writes me, he said, I used to work on the Jerry Lewis telethon. And Jerry Lewis, he said, I was in the wings with Jerry before he was introduced one time, and we were talking. And he said, I love your stuff. And he said to Jerry Lewis, goes, you're the funniest guy I've ever met outside of Eddie Deezen. And Jerry Lewis goes, you're not the first person that's ever told me that, which knocked me out.
Really?
Jerry Lewis could be aware of my existence. That story knocked me out. I'm like on Mount Everest, I was so happy, but he obviously knew who I was. He once sent me a signed picture. Jerry's a friend of a writer I know named Jim Nybauer, who's a great writer. And Jerry sent me a picture, dear Eddie, to Eddie, my lookalike, love Jerry Lewis. So he was aware of my existence, and that was the nice moments. Anyway, I met him and I saw him in Las Vegas. And he was so talented, just this wonderful. He did it part, Tony. He would take this cane and he threw it up like 30 feet in the air and he caught it behind his back. He sang, he joked, he played the trumpet. He was told stories. It was just so, him and Sammy Davis Jr. are the two most talented people I've ever seen in my life. Anyway.
Because I want to stop you really quick, because what's interesting is how Jerry Lewis is such a generational thing. Like we had mentioned off the air about Bob Hope. Is that certain generations attach themselves to certain people, but you go a couple of years later and they go, I don't get it. And when I was a kid, I had seen Jerry Lewis, but remember, this is now Jerry. We're now talking about, let's say the 1990s. We're talking about the Jerry who is 30 years past the climbing up the curtain at the Copa.
Stevie and I just watched King of Comedy, and he was that Jerry for like 30 or 40 years, and we all know, with the glasses and
the lozenge.
And the lozenge, right? The slick back hair. The Jerry that I love, was about 10 or 15 years. Those are the Dean Martin years are my favorite. But remember, this guy was in showbiz forever. He had like a 60-year career.
It was like some people overstayed their welcome. And I thought with Jerry Lewis, it's not necessarily that he overstayed his welcome. It's just that I think for me is that my generation did not get him. They saw him on the telethon. He had that prednisone where he was on the steroids, where he looked like he had gills. And it was really uncomfortable. And you're saying, this guy? And then as you start to go back and you see how cartoonish he was at one time and how talented, you go, I get it now. So that's why certain generations will attach themselves and say, Jerry Lewis was a genius. And that's why the French think he was Chaplin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's similar to Bob Hope. But if you look at Bob Hope's early films, this guy, he was all over. He was brilliant. The best diction and elocution. He'd say these long lines, rattle them off. Brilliant. And he's pretty out there. He does some physical stuff. Great. And then, but the Bob Hope, again, we knew for 40 years is this guy comes out, and he just stands there and tells these jokes. It wasn't the same Bob Hope. And he got older and older. He went older than Jerry. Bob Hope was doing his specials every month. So he was like 80 or something.
90.
And then finally
he was over 90.
He was 90. And I talked to Tom Hanks about him. We go with the brief. When we were kids, Bob Hope was bigger than the president. He was like the most famous guy in America. He was bigger than the president of the United States. Anyway, I'll tell you a story about, and I'll let you make a guess. Who has transcended time the best of all entertainers? Okay, Stevie and I were in a restaurant the other day. We went to a deli called Groucho's Deli. So
I know of it. Yeah.
We go to the Marx Brothers. We love it all. So we went to the waitress, cute waitress. I was kind of flirting. Go, so do you like the Marx Brothers? What's your favorite Marx Brothers films? She goes, I don't know who the Marx Brothers are. You work at the Marx Brothers, we work at Groucho's Deli. You don't know. There's pictures of the Marx Brothers. She didn't know, and I guess she never asked. Okay,
she's more of a Richard Marx fan, right?
Yeah, really. But anyway, I go, you don't know the Marx Brothers? I couldn't believe it. And I go, you do know the Three Stooges? And she goes, oh yeah, sure. And so, okay, the Three Stooges transcend that. And then I went a step further last night, same story. We were talking and kibitzing, and we went to a Chinese restaurant, and the Chinese lady named Emily, she's there. And we're talking, and you won't believe this one, but we're talking about the Beatles. And I go, well, I go, you know the Beatles? And she goes, who's that? I go, you know who the Beatles are? And Steve and I had to ask like 5 or 6 times. He goes, the Beatles, the band. And Steve showed him a picture. We couldn't believe anybody on the planet Earth didn't know the Beatles, but she wasn't aware of the Beatles. And I go to her, do you know who the Three Stooges are? And she goes, oh yeah. So apparently of this generation, of all the old acts, all pop culture, I think the Three Stooges are the #1 act. That's what I believe from those two conversations. I think the Three Stooges are the one that's transcended everybody. They're kind of like Shakespeare. Maybe Elvis would be one. Maybe I think everybody knows Elvis, but they're that level.
I would say with Three Stooges, well, because also it transcends, but it's also a very, as we've heard, about a guy thing. It's like, a lot of
Maybe so,
women,
but
they'll
you know,
watch and just shake their head.
I know so many Girl Three Stooges fans. So on Facebook, there's a lot of Girl Three Stooges fans. To me, Curly Howard's the greatest comedian that ever lived. I think he's as good as Chaplin, as good as Keaton, but he talks. Remember, he said he was a verbal comedian too. He did it all. To me, he's the greatest comedian ever.
He was, well, yeah, exactly. And you think about after he had the stroke, and then Shemp, who, by the way, a lot of people are like, oh, Shemp wasn't curly. It's like Shemp was in the act before. He was with Ted Healy and his Stooges.
Yes, by the way, it's funny because I'm reading the biography of Ted Healy now. I was on Facebook, okay, and there was a post about Ted Healy, blah, blah, and I put a comment, and I put, Ted Healy was a hack comic, because I'd seen his MGM shorts with the Stooges, and I didn't think he was funny. So it happened that a writer wrote a book on Ted Healy, and he answered my comment. He goes, Eddie, Ted Healy wasn't a hack comic, blah, blah. And he's a mensch. He mailed me the book actually to read. So I'm reading about Ted Healy now. But anyway, you're right. Shemp started the act. And by the way, Shemp was a very good comedian. I'm not anti-Shemp. It's just he followed Curly. It's like following Elvis. It's like, I'm going to play Elvis. Nobody can fill those shoes. But Shemp is funny in his own right.
Yeah, it's like Dick York and Dick Sargent, right?
Yeah, I like Dick York. Yeah.
Well, and then you had Joe Besser. You bring Stinky in from the Abbott and Costello, and he didn't want to be hit. It's like, you're not going to hit.
What Stevie and I were just talking about. Yeah, he didn't want to be, and you want to be a member of the Three Stooges. Kind of like, I want to join the Beatles, but I don't want to sing. It's like, what the fuck, Oh, sorry, what the yeah,
you can curse.
What are you doing this? So Larry apparently stood up, and Larry said, "I'll take your punches for you, Joe. I'll take the hits." And Larry, being a mensch, he stood up for Joe, and he took extra hits because Joe wouldn't be hit.
Well, and I understand why Mo wanted to keep the Stooges going. Obviously, with you get Curly Joe, who they shaved his head, and they kept it going during the TV days. And a lot of people don't realize why they kept it going was
cash cow, wasn't it?
Well, by TV, because Mo didn't realize they didn't make a lot of money when they were under Columbia Pictures, and by I think 1957 is when their contract ran up. Right. Somebody actually told Mo, they said, "Do you realize how much you're worth?" Because the production company, Columbia, they kept saying like, "Oh, I don't know, guys. I don't know how much we can pay you." So they were very self-conscious about what was going on at the time. And then until they realized that, no, you guys are one of the most popular acts of all time to that point.
Around the world.
And that's why then they end up renegotiating contracts, and then it's the Scooby-Doo Mysteries with the Three Stooges and Scooby-Doo and everything, and they were all Mad World.
Yeah, Mad World. They did a 3-second cameo, which was cute. It's kind of, I went as a kid. I saw that in New York at Radio City Music Hall with the Rockettes. It was so electric, and I went to movie. I'm going to see the Three Stooges, and they were on for 3 seconds. I remember that it was the shortest cameo in movie history, I think. But just to see them was a thrill. I lit up.
Where they were the firemen, And
they were the firemen, right? They didn't even do lines.
So by 1970, the Stooges, they're still going with Curly Joe, and then Larry has the debilitating stroke. He goes into the motion pictures home, and Mo wants to keep the act going. And there's a photo that's out there right before Mo's stroke. It's Mo, Curly Joe, and Emil Sitka, who was going to replace Larry in the act. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, you want to talk about people who overstay their welcome? Oof.
Yeah.
I don't want to see that.
Well, Tony, you know how it is in show, but they'll milk the cash cow. They'd say Grease again. They made Grease 2, which was a mistake. And some people prefer Grease 2 to Grease. I always go, the people that like Grease 2 better than Grease are the people who like The Wiz better than The Wizard of Oz. It's like, are you serious? This one is this beautiful juggernaut classic, and this other is a piece of crap, But
they like Jackie Mason over Rodney Dangerfield in Caddyshack 2.
Yeah, it's like what? Or they're the people who go to a Beach Boys concert and yell out, "Sing Kokomo."
Where's Mike Love?
Yeah,
but no, it's
by the way,
it's fascinating.
Some very nice people like Grease too. I'm not saying anything against it. It's just they're not. It's not in the same league as Grease. It's just But again, it's all subjective. With aesthetics, art, it's all subjective. Some people out there, I'm sure, like the Sex Pistols better than the Beatles. And in their universe, it's better, Some like men, some like women. Steve Allen said, taste in comedy is like taste in colors, cars, or women. And it's all subjective, and that's the way it is. Some people I'll watch Three Stooges, I'll be rolling on the floor, and they'll be sitting straight faced to watch Three Stooges. My mom was an angel, and she loved the Three Stooges, but my mom hated Jerry Lewis. And I would be watching Jerry Lewis, and Mom sitting stone faced, or she'd fall asleep, And I'm going, Mom, this genius is on it. You know what? But she just didn't like Jerry Lewis. My ex-wife didn't like Jerry Lewis. Yeah,
there's some people who just don't get it.
He's like two factions. You either love Jerry Lewis or hate him.
I was at it was maybe about 8 years ago, and I was in Pittsburgh, and I went to go see Gilbert Gottfried. And I know you were on Gilbert's podcast about 5 years
yes,
ago, which was a
I
great
love him.
appearance. I encourage
Yes.
everybody to go check that out. And of course, we lost Gilbert last year.
Yes.
And so in 2022, I was in New York, and I had a chance to meet a bunch of people. I met Richard Kind, I met John Davidson, I met Jason Alexander at the Gilbert Gottfried Memorial.
Okay.
And so I got a chance to talk to Dara, his wife. And I said, one of my favorite memories was going to see Gilbert at the Pittsburgh Improv, a place that I've performed at, and watching Gilbert on stage, and the couple that's next to me. And it was, I think it was a boyfriend, girlfriend. And Gilbert's on stage doing jokes about Ben Gazzara. He's doing jokes about Hervé Villachez. He's doing impressions of Groucho and Marlon Brando and everybody.
Right.
And the boyfriend who's next to me is on the floor laughing. And the girlfriend is sitting in the chair going, what is this?
Yeah.
What am I watching right now?
Right.
And that was funnier than anything that I saw on stage, because sometimes there are certain comedians or certain acts, like you said about Jerry Lewis, that you get, and it's almost makes it more fun that you get it because it's like you're a part of a secret club. Like, oh, we're a part of this cult, while everybody else, like, they don't get it.
Have you ever been to a movie like that? I've been to movies like that where the crowd is roaring with laughing. This isn't friggin' funny, you know. I just haven't. Everybody's laughing, but you
The Hangover. The Hangover for me.
Yeah, really. Even in like some films, I will be the only one there, and I'll be laughing, and nobody else laughs.
It's so funny, but
by the way,
you know,
I just glimpsed Eddie.
Oh no, that was Harpo that walked by.
That was Harpo. Okay.
Yeah, Eddie's somewhere around here. Yeah, Harpo wanted to say hi.
Okay.
So
Hi,
you're a big Beatles fan.
Yes.
And I'm somebody that I grew up with the Beatles, and you know, some of their stuff, the Mophead stuff is like, okay, yeah, that's fine. And it really was, it truly seemed like they were a band that did things. This is just my opinion, but this could be a fact. I don't know. But it seemed like the Beatles were a band that did things to get popular. And then when they achieved that level of popularity, they're like, okay, now it's time to do what we wanted to do in the first place.
That's a good analysis.
Because so there's that, I had that 2 CD set where it was the early years and the later years. I never put on the early years. I only put on the later years.
You like the later years. Okay.
When they grew the mustaches, they grew the hair out, they went to India, they're hanging out with Ravi Shankar.
Right.
That's the Beatles I preferred, because you could tell the diversity that they had, as opposed to, hey, let's just make the girls in the malt shops happy. It's like, no, we're going to do the music we like. What's you're a connoisseur. I told Steve I was going to look up all these Beatles facts, and he's like, don't even bother. Eddie knows them all.
Yeah, I'm a Beatles expert. I've read like 6 or 7, this is last count. This is about 10 years ago, but I've read 600 or 700 books on Beatles. I probably read over 1,000 books on Beatles. I'm not kidding you. I just, I registered an encyclopedia. What you say is very sage. You're probably right, especially John and George to an extent. I'll disagree with you to the extent that I think Paul liked the glamour stuff. The Beatles were these, I don't know if you know their history, but they were in Hamburg. They started in Hamburg, Germany, and they were these tough guys in leather outfits, you know. When the Beatles came to America in 1964, okay, there were a lot of jokes. You know, these guys are pansies, you know, they're a bunch of sissies that have long hair, they look like girls. They were tough guys. They were in the streets of Hamburg, and they performed there for like a year. And they performed like 8 hours a night. They were taking prellies, these things that kept them off all night. And these were thugs, you know, in the audience. There was a guy trying to get on the stage once, and John Lennon literally kicked them. He literally kicked him off. John Lennon once had a beer bottle, and he opened it with his teeth. They would get into fights there, you know, and they were taking drugs, going to whorehouses, you know. These were really tough, gritty guys. So then when they hired Brian Epstein as their manager, he was a gay guy, and he was nothing homophobic, but he liked dressing them up. He put them into these outfits, and they combed down their hair, and he made them more theatrical. He was a theatrical type guy. And I think Paul liked that. Paul liked the theater. Paul liked that kind of theatrical thing. But John did. John always hated. John was always jealous of the Rolling Stones because they were always looked on as bad boys, you know, and he wanted the Beatles to be bad boys. So John kind of swallowed it for a couple of years, and then he got, you know, weirder and weirder. And then by the end, he's pretty freaked out.
Well, and then when you look at what their solo stuff, when they break up in 1970, they kind of continued that. They kind of continued where they were going when they were splitting. It was John had more of his experimental stuff. He
went freaky with Yoko.
Yeah, exactly. And then George had, you know, My Sweet Lord that came out not long after it. But George then Wings was the most mainstream of all of them.
Wings were kind of like a little watered down Beatles. They were like a poppy pop group. Yeah. And Ringo has goes. How I look at it, Tony, is after they split, they all had some great songs. And that, like, about a 6 or 7 year period, they all had some great classic songs. And then they started to taper out and they all got washed down. John lasted the shortest, of course, and his last album was good. But after like maybe like 80 or so, their songs weren't as good. Paul's last good stuff was like mid 80s, I think. The last 3 years, he hasn't really done anything great, in my opinion. George's later stuff wasn't that good. And Ringo's later stuff wasn't that good. They kind of kept the momentum of the Beatles going for 5 or 6 years, and then it kind of tapered out.
Yeah, when I heard "Got My Mind Set on You," and I'm like, wait, who does that? They said, that's George Harrison. I'm like, no, come on. That's not George Harrison. They're like, well, George, somebody need to pay a couple of bills here.
Yeah, that was a song the Beatles used to play in the Cavern. They used to play in a club called Cavern in their Liverpool days before they were famous. When the electricity went out, they would play that song to entertain you, but the lights would go out. It was such a cheap club, and it had no insulation. And the sweat would short the light, so it was dark. And they would sing, "I Got Your Mind Set on You" to entertain the fans between sets.
I didn't know that. I didn't know it dated back that long.
Yeah, it's an old song. It's not a Lennon-McCartney song. It's just an old song the Beatles used to play, and George just adapted it.
And then, of course, by the time you get to the late 80s, and then Tom Petty takes hold, and he brings Jeff Lynne in, and Jeff Lynne has Ringo, and he has George Harrison to
the Traveling Wilburys.
Yeah, which it's not bad, but it's the transition, of course, of the band, and but it's so funny how, again, you hear all those different sounds, and you think by the time the 80s start, you're like, maybe if they like combined all four of those guys' sounds, it would sound like the Beatles. It was like, really. It was perfect. It would have been a perfect marriage, but
maybe so.
So speaking of voices, I wanted to play a couple of things. So people who might be listening that are a little bit younger may not have seen you in 1941, may not have seen you in "I Want to Hold Your Hand," but they may have heard your voice too. I want to play a little bit because this is where I was truly introduced to the work of Eddie Deezen back in the day.
Okay. Yeah.
What a part that was for you.
Yes, I did 20 episodes of Dexter's Laboratory. I was a recurring character. The greatest animation director in history, her name was Colette Sunderman. She directed Dexter's Laboratory. She's marvelous. I can't say enough about her. There was a lovely girl named Christine Cavanaugh who sadly died very young. She did Dexter's voice, and then Candy Milo took over. She was great too, but totally happy experience. I love Jeff Bennett, who did Johnny Bravo at Cartoon Network. He was the father, and Kit Susay was the mother. It's just, I love doing Dexter's Laboratory. It's one of those shows, you give away the secret in showbiz. It's like doing Polar Express or Grease or War Games. Some of these movies, you're so happy you would have paid them. You know how that is, Tony. It's like they're hiring you, but you're so happy you would, paying is such gravy. I would have paid them to do those experiences, to have those experiences.
Because you have been kind of admitted over time that you had a little bit of stage fright, especially performing in front of live audiences.
And I have a very hard time memorizing lines. It's very hard for me.
So when you're in a studio, when they say, "Hey, we got studio time, you want to come in for Dexter's Lab," and then you're like, "Yeah, we're going to do Mandark," it's perfect for you.
Exactly. And you do your line and you flub and nobody cares. Voiceovers, first of all, you don't have to memorize. You're reading everything off of paper. It's a piece of cake. And if you screw up, so what? Take 2, take 3, take 4, no big deal. In the movies, they don't, like when I did War Games, my War Game story is I kept screwing up. I had the one scene in War Games. Did you see War Games?
Years ago again, yes.
Okay, I have the one scene. I was the first computer nerd, and I kept screwing up the phrase data encryption algorithm. I screwed it up. I go data endocrine algorithm, data endocrine algorithm, and I screwed up 7 or 8 takes. And the producer puts his arm on my shoulder. He goes, "Eddie, let's go for a walk." So he goes, "Look, you're costing the studio a lot of money. We're going to get you these idiot cards, and you're going to read your lines off there." So he wrote it down, data encryption algorithm, and I read it. And we did it in one take, and that's the take you'll see if you see me in War Games. But yeah, with movies, when you do them too, you're amongst friends. It's like me with Tony. I'm going to hang out with Tony and talk. We're both very relaxed. When you're doing stand-up, you're with 200 strangers and all. It's a little bit of a scary experience. It gets easier. I noticed doing stand-up, and when I perform for live audience, once you get going, it's easy. But before it, I'm very nervous. But once you get started, the first couple jokes, I feel relaxed. I did 9 pilots, and I had to do the pilots in front of an audience. And I always notice I do my first couple lines, and I was scared, and I did a terrible show called Punky Brewster. But you do the lines, and it's actually fun once you feel good with the audience. But it takes me a while to get into that.
Yeah, you were in the first season of Punky Brewster, right?
First season I did 8 episodes. Yeah.
Do you work with Bill Bixby, right? Oh wait,
No,
no.
I worked with
Oh,
Ted
wait, what?
Bessel.
What? No, no. I was thinking of Blossom. My mistake. Bill
Okay,
Bixby
yeah.
was
Bill Bixby,
wrong.
he was one of the when I was a kid.
Teen or
Yeah.
TV
Bill
show
Bixby.
for.
Do you remember? I don't know if you remember that. For back when I was a kid, I loved My Favorite Martian. I knew Bill from My Favorite Martian. I loved that show when I was a kid. But no, I never got to meet him or work with him.
Yeah, because I confused Punky Brewster with Blossom, and there were two
Okay.
shows where you had the female protagonist there, and
Right.
but no, but like you made that transition pretty easily in the '80s to like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to start doing some voice work, and you do have a very distinct voice, and it worked out. And you've also used some of your comedic chops for parts like this, another one of my favorites. So this part, by the way, which is in the show Duckman, a Gabor Chupo show,
right?
And you played Iggy Catalpa, who was a politically correct comedian, which I think would be probably pretty successful nowadays based on how things are going. But it was such a funny part because this show again is one of the most absurd but well-written shows of all time, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was a Jason Alexander, right?
Yes.
Yes, he was wonderful, super great guy. I love Jason. Fun to work. Every time I did that show, I loved it. Very happy times. Yeah.
And a lot of great voice actors on that show, not only just Jason Alexander, but Greg Berger was on there, I think, Kat Sois, and a lot of others that wanted that loved it. Like if you knew animation, especially in the golden age that came out of the late 80s, early 90s that popped up, that Duckman was one of those shows that it is, I'll still watch it to this day. I will laugh and I'm like, this is so well written. Why was this show not bigger? Why was this show not on regular television instead of USA Network? And you played such a great pivotal role in that show. That's like a huge plot point.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was fun. We were voiceovers when I first came to Hollywood. My friend would always tell me voiceovers are the toughest field as part of showbiz to break into. Stand up, anybody. When I started stand up, they had at the Comedy Store in Hollywood, it was potluck night and anybody could just go on stage. You just register your name. So it was very open. Getting into movies and TV, of course, is hard, but voiceovers was an insular community. There were like a few hundred to control. And you notice the cartoons when we were kids, it was pretty much the same voice doing the same thing. Mel Blanc handled everything at Warner Brothers, and there were June Foray, and there was just this little community. But then
Pat Buttram did a bunch of voices back in the days.
Yeah, and there was the guy Frank Nelson, that guy. There were these certain guys that did all the voiceovers. But later people started realizing how easy work it is. You go voiceover, a movie, you got to get shaved and groomed and made up, look good, put on underarm deodorant, really see people. And you're there for 9 or 10 hours every day, 8 or 9 hours. Voiceovers, you can go in scraggly with a beard. Nobody cares. You come in with your glasses and scraggly. And you're there for an hour or two, and you read some lines. It's just so easy. And the celebrities started really, wait a minute, this is easy, So people started gravitating and getting into it. And voiceover agencies started up, and they started going. And I signed with ICM, which was the best voiceover agency. Jeff Danis was a brilliant agent, the best agent ever. I was with him for 22 years, and they just got me a lot of jobs. And he got me Polar Express, Well, Bob Zemeckis wrote me into Polar Express, but Jeff made the deal, to get me into Polar Express.
Well, in Polar Express, obviously, it was a book that I had read. I think it was a Calder like award winner back in the day, and I remembered it wasn't so much the writing that was in the book; it was the animation, drawing, and that's what I was drawn to when I was a kid. No pun intended. Right. And when I saw that was making into a full length movie, and of course, you're a huge part in it, and I mean. You really are all over the place, and you just start to find like different seeds in my life of what I grew up with, what I consumed. Eddie Deezen's like a part of a lot of this here as I've played Dexter's Lab, and I'm looking at the background now that you've been on Kim Possible, Sesame Street, Scooby-Doo, all of that. You're just all over the place. Zapped with Scott Baio.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks, Tony.
But you've been around and you're still active. I think I saw a picture of you recently. You were doing some voice acting.
I did an on-camera. Stevie and I did it, but we green screened it because this guy's I think he's in Florida or whatever. But Stevie and I green screened a thing for Critters 4. I did Critters 2 in 1988. They're doing a Critters 4. This is my misbrush with fate. I did Critters 2. Okay, I started. That's relatively straight role for me, but I turned into a Playboy centerfold in that movie. I morph into one. I'm this guy, Phil Mark Crichton. I morph into one, so that's weird. Critters 3 was the next one. I wasn't in that. It was the film debut of another actor. His name is Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh, I never heard of him.
Yeah, it was direct-to-video Turkey, but I miss working with DiCaprio by this much. And now I'm in Critters 4, so I worked before and after Leonardo DiCaprio in that series. Somehow I don't think DiCaprio is going to be in Critters 4.
Yeah, you were saying about how like back in the day where you would go into a studio and you didn't have to worry about shaving or anything. It's probably even better now that you could do it from home.
You do it from home. Stevie and I, when we get an audition, now this super nice lady named Diane, she's a lovely lady. She'll record us. It's in Greenville, which is not that far away. And we ride over and she has this beautiful little studio and we record there. So I've done I just started back and we have my old agent, Dean Pinero, my old agent handles me again. So I'm hoping I can get some voiceover jobs. I auditioned for a Nickelodeon film about 10 days ago, a Nickelodeon project, but it doesn't look like I got it. But I thought I gave a good audition, but you never know.
But if you close your eyes and you hear Eddie Deezen in 2023 on the Check Your Brain podcast, and you hear Eddie Deezen in 1978 in Greece, it's the same voice. Like there's not like you're not like Elton John where you went from, crocodile rock up here to I'm a baritone right now. I can't hit those notes anymore. It's the same voice. I mean, you've been able to take care of your voice. I mean, you're not a smoker, you're not a heavy drinker, you're not any of that. So you're able to take care of your voice over time. And by the way, if anybody wants to hear a little bit more of Eddie's voice, you can go to Cameo at cameo.com/Eddie Deezen and go buy a Cameo. If you know somebody who is interested in going like whether again for birthdays, for anniversaries, for bar mitzvahs, graduations, Christmas presents, Hanukkah, whatever it is, go to cameo.com/Eddie Deezen and you get Eugene or whatever you enjoyed him in, all the things that we have mentioned here on this podcast. He can do that for you and just go there and you get a cameo from him.
Thank you, Tony.
Well, Eddie, hey, great. It was great talking to you. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for doing this podcast. I can't wait to put it out and, good luck with everything. I can't wait to stay in touch. I enjoy. And by the way, unless there's a limit on Facebook, you are a great Facebook follow. Like you post so much content and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, writing jokes is my joy. Tony, I will just lay down in bed and I just, okay, I'm gonna write a joke. And I since I was a little kid, I loved doing it. And Facebook, I get an audience for it.
Would you ever do stand-up again?
No, I did. No, I don't need the money and I didn't enjoy it,
You didn't enjoy it.
I didn't enjoy it. So I'm very happy here doing what I'm doing. Stevie and I want to get back into films. That's our goal. And we're going to start doing Comic Cons and signing shows again. But Stevie says I got to go.
Yeah, and I think you have a Comic-Con coming up, but again, go to cameo.com/Eddie Deezen if you want a cameo and go follow him and see where you can go see him. I know you have Steve told me that there's a couple of Comic-Cons that are coming up in the near future that and one of these days I'm going to head on down to the to your neck of the woods. I'm not going to say where, but your neck of the woods and have some lunch. Maybe you'll go to Groucho's, have a sandwich.
I'd love to. Steve and I would love to see you. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Tony. And you do, I'm not just saying this to flatter you, I swear to God, you do the best John Travolta impression I've ever heard in my life.
Well, thank you so much.
That's dead on.
I shot Marvin in the face.
I can do an old, I'm a reaction. I can do a Jimmy Cagney, I can do a Clark Gable. We don't have time here, but I do a couple, but that's a great John Travolta.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, so we'll get together soon. I'm looking forward to it. Okay. And thanks everybody for listening to this week's edition of the Check Your Brain podcast. If you like what you heard, I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur, and I'm on Rumble, YouTube, all the other places. And just subscribe to me. A free podcast coming out every week for you. My name is Tony Mazur. Thank you for listening to this week's Check Your Brain podcast. We'll be back with you next week. Bye now.